Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into something genuinely fascinating. We're going to look at how a relatively small ethnic minority actually manages to influence the foreign policy of a global superpower, all to ensure the survival of their homeland. It is a classic David versus Goliath story of grassroots organization, and it really pulls back the curtain on how local, domestic organizing can ripple outward to shape massive global geopolitics. So if you've ever wondered how foreign policy decisions are really made behind closed doors, you are going to love this case study. $2 billion. That is a pretty staggering number, right? Well, that is the exact amount of foreign aid this specific group has successfully secured for their homeland since 1992. But here's the kicker. The context behind that number is what's really wild. We are talking about Armenian Americans, a demographic that makes up less than half of 1% of the entire U.S. population. Yet somehow, through highly organized boots-on-the-ground lobbying, they've managed to direct massive streams of financial, humanitarian, and technological support straight back to the Republic of Armenia. How on earth does such a tiny slice of the population punch so far above its weight class?
Well, to understand that kind of geopolitical leverage, we really have to look at their unique demographic reality. Right now, there are roughly 3 million people living in the physical Republic of Armenia, but the global diaspora, that is estimated at a massive 11 million people. Think about that for a second. The vast majority of Armenians live entirely outside their geographical homeland, scattered across places like Russia, the United States, France, Lebanon, and beyond. But this massive dispersion hasn't weakened them. Actually, quite the opposite. It has created this incredibly powerful, highly motivated global network that is completely bound together by a shared identity.
Okay, let's dive right into this. To really make sense of this complex geopolitical web, we're going to take this in 5 steps. 1. The global Armenian diaspora. 2. The power of ethnic lobbying. 3. The fight for historical memory. 4. Building ethnic soft power. And 5. Walking the geopolitical tightrope.
Starting off with Section 1, the global Armenian diaspora, a scattered nation united by survival.
You know, the modern diaspora wasn't just formed by ancient history alone. It's actually been actively shaped by a series of very intense modern crises. This forged a shared identity completely rooted in displacement and a deep-seated need to protect what remains. Just look at the late 20th and early 21st centuries. We saw these major waves of emigration that rapidly expanded the diaspora in Western countries, especially the US. In 1988, you had the devastating Spitak earthquake, which triggered massive ecological emigration. Then, in the 1990s, the collapse of the Soviet Union and the conflict over the Nagorno-Karabakh region brought thousands of economic migrants and conflict refugees over to America. And more recently, between 2011 and 2016, thousands of ethnic Armenians fled the Syrian war, seeking refuge in the West. Every single wave brought fresh energy, totally reinforcing the diaspora's sense of duty to their homeland.
And that sense of duty? It's driven by what researchers describe as a two-front battle. It's fascinating. On one side, you have the fear of the Red Genocide, which is the literal threat of physical extermination and losing historical territories. But on the other side, there's what they call the White Massacre. This is the very real, creeping threat of losing their distinct culture, language, and identity by totally assimilating into host countries like the United States. So, for the diaspora, political activism isn't just politics. It's literally viewed as an act of self-preservation on both of these fronts.
Moving on to Section 2, the power of ethnic lobbying, or the David versus Goliath machine.
So, that shared sense of existential threat we just talked about, it birthed an absolute powerhouse of a political movement. Actually, prominent U.S. administration advisors like Zbigniew Brzezinski have historically ranked the Armenian lobby right up there with the Jewish and Cuban lobbies as one of the top 3 strongest ethnic political lobbies in the entire United States. And what's wild is how their operation contrasts with their geopolitical rivals. The Turkish lobby has historically enjoyed this massive, steady inflow of state funding straight from their homeland. That lets them hire top-tier, highly professional public relations companies right in Washington, D.C. The Armenian lobby, on the other hand, operates almost entirely as a grassroots movement. It is totally self-funded by the diaspora and heavily driven by volunteers. But despite operating with vastly different resources and less money, this grassroots machine has consistently pulled off massive legislative victories.
Now, this kind of grassroots success doesn't just happen out of nowhere. It all traces back to a foundational blueprint created by one truly incredible individual,
Vahan Kardashian. Get this, he arrived in the United States in 1902 from the Ottoman Empire, and he didn't speak a single word of English. Astoundingly, just 2 years later, he was studying law at Yale University. By 1918, he had founded the Armenian Committee for the Independence of Armenia, literally the very first Armenian-American lobby. It was his early hustle that laid the exact groundwork for the massive organizations operating in Washington today.
Which brings us to Section 3, the fight for historical memory, a 50-year campaign.
For over half a century, the absolute core pillar of the diaspora's political activism wasn't just about securing foreign aid dollars. It was this relentless, deeply symbolic campaign for official historical recognition of the tragic events during the fall of the Ottoman Empire. And that 50-year grind finally culminated in a huge legislative victory in late 2019, when both the U.S. House of Representatives and the Senate passed Resolution 150. This historic resolution officially recognized the mass killings of an estimated 1.5 million Armenians between 1915 and 1922 as a genocide. Passing this was the climax of decades of organizing, a massive symbolic win that required navigating through some of the most intense diplomatic pushback you can imagine.
All right, Section 4, building ethnic soft power and securing a legacy. Because as you might guess, DC politics is only one piece of the puzzle here. The diaspora realized super early on that to combat that white massacre, the loss of their culture, their influence had to go way beyond politics. They needed to deeply integrate into the cultural and academic fabric of America. Establishing a massive academic footprint translates directly into geopolitical soft power. Today, you've got prestigious institutions like Harvard, Columbia, UCLA, and Clark University, all hosting dedicated centers or studies focused entirely on Armenian history, culture, and language. Pushing to get Armenology formally included in elite American universities, which really started gaining traction back in the 1950s, essentially ensures that their history is treated as a permanent, respected contribution to world heritage.
And that soft power extends right into global philanthropy too. In 2015, which marked the centenary of the genocide, the diaspora established the Aurora Prize for Awakening Humanity. Instead of just focusing inward on their own community, they took their historical trauma and transformed it into this amazing modern humanitarian initiative. They award a prestigious annual prize to individuals making exceptional contributions to saving human lives anywhere in the world. It is an incredibly smart strategy. It elevates the diaspora's presence on the global stage, perfectly aligning their specific ethnic history with broad universal humanitarian values.
Finally, Section 5, walking the geopolitical tightrope or the diplomatic triangle. So, having looked at all this domestic influence, we need to zoom out for a second. On the global level, a highly complex, incredibly fragile diplomatic triangle emerges, and the United States is caught smack in the middle of it. For the U.S., their primary geopolitical goal is Middle East stability and anti-terrorism. To pull that off, they rely heavily on Turkey, a strategic ally that gives U.S. armed forces access to the Incirlik Air Base, which is a facility critical enough to literally store nuclear weapons. Turkey, of course, knows this. They use that strategic leverage to pursue their own goals of border integrity and narrative control, strongly resisting any external historical redefinitions that might lead to massive compensation claims. And then, on the third side of this triangle, you have the Armenian diaspora. Their primary goal is homeland survival and international recognition. Since they don't have military leverage to offer, they rely entirely on that highly organized U.S. grassroots influence we've been talking about to pressure American policymakers. It is this constant, nerve-wracking balancing act where a single domestic resolution can have immediate, massive international consequences.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a pretty big, thought-provoking question. As new generations of Armenian Americans are born, how will they balance full cultural integration in America with the ongoing political and economic survival of a homeland they may never have even lived in? Will their grassroots power continue to rival those massive state-funded lobbies, or will that white massacre of assimilation eventually dilute their geopolitical strength? It is a truly fascinating dynamic to watch unfold, and one that absolutely redefines what it means to be a global citizen today. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.